Ceasefire now! 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 Ceasefire now!
Yeah, we are, if not now, a movement of American Jews organizing to organize our community to end our government's support of Israelis' occupation and apartheid, and currently their 4-month-long bombardment and massacre in Gaza. So we are here today calling on President Biden to say he has to use his power to call for a ceasefire finally, once and for all. Enough of the hand-wringing, enough of the empty statements, but he needs to use everything in his power, in our U.S. government's power, to put pressure on the Israeli government to call for a ceasefire and to end the over 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, and that needs to stop months ago.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. We are here in rage and grief. The prayer I just chanted, the Shema, proclaims that God is one. In this moment of deep division, we come together in refusal and in affirmation. We refuse to allow governments to turn us against one another and to traumatize us into forgetting our interconnectedness. In this coming together of Shiva for ceasefire, we affirm the sacredness of all life and acknowledge that our lives and all of our political and collective struggles are indeed connected. Shema means listen, so I invite us to slow down for the next hour and a half and feel and listen to the power in our grief and rage as Jews and as Americans who are calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. We are calling for an end to the U.S.'s unconditional support of Israel's genocide, apartheid, and military occupation of Palestine. We are here to call for a release of the remaining Israeli and foreign national hostages in Gaza, and finally, a release of all Palestinians kidnapped and held without detention in Israel. We are here in our oneness, and so our demands are holistic. To ground us in presence and connection to ourselves, to each other, and the land, I'm going to ask everyone to breathe and sound out 3 letters, the 3 letters of the Shema, the Shin, the Mem, and the Ayin, with a hiss, a hum, and a breath, to awaken the mother elements of fire, water, and air. So we'll begin by letting the breath out, inhaling and exhaling with a hiss. With this hiss, we kindle the generative fires of rage. Release the breath. Inhale and exhale with a hum. With this hum, we resonate with the healing waters of grief. And finally, we release the breath. Inhale into the belly and exhale with a deep breath to balance between them and to affirm our lives and our interconnectedness with all life.
And thank you all for being here in this historic place with us as part of a sustained presence of Jews and allies mourning Palestinian and Israeli lives lost, calling for a lasting ceasefire, and demanding that President Biden send no more money to Israel for the war crimes it is committing in Gaza. We wish that we could grieve slowly. We wish we could stop the world in its tracks to comprehend the sheer scale of the loss of life on, before, and since October 7th. We wish that the loved ones of the over 30,000 Palestinians, including over 12,600 children, had time to mourn their loved ones in the many faith traditions they hold. We wish that President Netanyahu had allowed the loved ones of the 1,200 Israelis killed on October 7th, including at least 33 children, to sit Shiva, instead of launching into an immediate campaign of dehumanization, violence, and terror against Gazans. But we are forced to multitask with our grief because deaths are still accruing. Last month, as Americans watched the Super Bowl, the Israeli military started dropping bombs on Rafah, where 1.5 million Palestinians had been instructed to take refuge from the assault on all other parts of the Gaza Strip. 2 days later, the Senate passed a bill that would send $14 billion to the Israeli military. This is an emergency for the people of Gaza. And instead of doing everything in their power to prevent the ongoing atrocities, the Biden administration is ready to sign off on the proposed weapons package, directly fueling this avalanche of death and displacement. So we have to grieve and chant and march and struggle. We have to do it all because our leaders are actively enabling this genocide. President Biden is actively enabling this genocide. We are American Jews with ancestors from around the world, and we honor our Jewish tradition, which is rooted in the belief that all human life is sacred and which compels us to oppose oppression everywhere it lives. We are horrified and outraged by the ongoing genocide that Israel is perpetrating in Gaza, with over 30,000 Palestinians killed, 3/4 of the population displaced, and 500,000 facing catastrophic hunger as a result of Israelis' illegal siege on the territory. As the military closes in on the 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah, we renew our demand that President Biden and every member of his administration do everything in their power to bring about a ceasefire now. We want to acknowledge that words have power and context, and that word, genocide, holds a lot. After I led music at an action a few months ago, a loved one saw a photo of me in front of a sign that said, "Jews say no to genocide," and they struggled with that word, and they let me know. It took several long conversations for me to realize that they were actually happy that I was there speaking out for a ceasefire, and we were both horrified by Israel's devastating actions, and it was the vocabulary itself that was activating. We do not use the word genocide lightly. We use it as Palestinians are being deliberately displaced, starved, stripped of basic necessities, and massacred amidst decades of ongoing violence and dispossession of land. If that feels uncomfortable to associate with Israel and with this moment, we want to invite you to sit in that discomfort today, along with the grief and the rage that have already brought us together. It is intensely uncomfortable. It is devastating. For those of us who are here as American Jews, this moment is not about our comfort or our devastation, and I hope that our comfort and our devastation might guide us in our actions to demand an end to this cycle of unimaginable violence, to demand a lasting ceasefire and safety and freedom for everyone. President Biden has gone on the record as saying, were there no Israel, there wouldn't be a Jew in the world who was safe. We know that when he says that, he is expressing a belief that many officials in the Israeli military and in the Israeli government hold as well. that without the oppression of Palestinians, without the ability to engage in indiscriminate violence against a group of people they treat as second-class citizens, Israelis cannot be safe, and Jews all over the world cannot be safe. We are here to say no to more violence as the path to peace, no to more injustice as the path to freedom. Jewish safety must not, cannot, and will not come at the hands of Palestinian suffering. Jewish tradition teaches us that all human life is sacred, and that means all human life is connected. We will only be safe and free when all people of all nations are safe and free. So we're going to sing a song in Hebrew about exactly that. It's a line from the book of Isaiah. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore.
לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה, לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה, לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יסגו אל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה.
We are here today, right in front of Independence Hall, which is a place steeped in history and memory for the United States and for its leaders. In 2 days, when President Biden addresses the country for the final State of the Union address in his term, he's going to mention this history. He's going to invoke it. But we know that where we are standing is also called Lenapehoking, that it is the unceded territory of the Lenape people who cared for and stewarded this land long before any European settlers arrived. And we know that just as many people in power in Israel would rather deny and minimize the oppression and suffering of Palestinians, many people in power right here in the United States attempt to deny the displacement and slaughter that happened on this land in the name of so-called American greatness. From Philly to Palestine, occupation is a crime. From Philly to Palestine, occupation is a crime. I know that it feels weird to be chanting here. I know we might feel like a small group of people in a very big square full of traffic, full of tourists. And I know that when you feel small, it is easier to get quieter. And what I need us instead to do in this moment where we feel small is to be louder. Thank you all so much. Don't think it doesn't matter. We're here because we know it matters, because we refuse indifference and apathy to the historical trauma on this land, to the historical and present trauma on this land, and to the historical and present trauma happening in Gaza right now. As we understand that all of these forms of violence, that colonization, enslavement, and xenophobia here are connected to the violence happening in Israel-Palestine right now, we understand that all of these forms of violence are connected, and so all of our resistance to every single one of those forms of violence must be connected as well. What we are here to do right now, me, yes, as the person with the mic, but also every single one of you here, we are here to speak truth to power. We cannot change the past, but what we can do is come together to mourn the dead and fight like hell for the living. In the United States, in Israel and Palestine, and beyond. President Biden has the power to demand a lasting ceasefire, to move us out of this seemingly endless, but actually temporary cycle of violence and grief that has brought us here today, and into negotiations for the kind of peace that can only come when it also comes with justice. Is a temporary ceasefire good enough? Is expressing frustration with Israel's actions in private while continuing to fund what they are doing to Palestinians every day good enough? Absolutely not. We reject the idea that business as usual can continue in the face of this massacre, of this genocide, and we reject every single false promise that says that it is being carried out in the name of protecting Jews. Not in our name! 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 Not in our name, and not with our money. So I would now like to invite up our first speaker, Elliot, to share his story. Please welcome Elliot.
I'm going to be sharing the story, and I just want to preface some of these experiences are my own, and some are also some words and writings of some friends of mine, some Jewish, Israeli, and American activists, Sahar Vardi, Maya Rosen, and Erez Bleicher. I'm here today to grieve for Khalil Abu Yahya. He was a Gazan scholar, activist, and father. I was living in Israel when Khalil was introduced to our community of Jewish solidarity activists in the spring of 2018 during the Great March of Return, a series of weekly demonstrations near the Gaza fence, demanding the Palestinian right of return and protesting Israel's blockade of Gaza. And over the course of which Israeli forces killed over 200 Palestinians. And we supported the marchers being brutalized on the Gazan side of the militarized fence by organizing creative actions. While we couldn't join them directly, we did the best we could. We stood on a hillside overlooking their marches and had phone calls and recorded videos and edited them together to make it as if we were actually talking to each other and not speaking hundreds of yards apart. And Khalil was one of the Palestinian leaders that we spoke with weeks on and off over the course of months. And he believed unwaveringly in collective liberation and solidarity across borders. He was an avid student of post-colonial theory who had plans to earn his PhD abroad. And he rejected the psychic blueprints of dispossession and segregation that the occupation imposes. His imagination was trained unflinchingly on a world of possibility without border walls, colonialism, occupation, and massacre. I never got to meet Khalil in person, but after I moved back to Philly in 2019, he's granted an exit permit to receive life-saving surgery for spinal cord cancer. And because of the siege and closure of Gaza at that time, the hospital in Gaza City was unable to provide him treatment, even at that time in 2019. But nonetheless, it was still a harrowing ordeal for him outside of Gaza. He was treated at a hospital in East Jerusalem, at a Palestinian hospital, which ran out of blood during his operation. And Israeli solidarity activists organized a blood drive, an emergency blood drive. Fortunately, he survived, and their friendships grew as he recovered. And this fall, after October 7th, as Israeli airstrikes began, the Israeli army ordered Khalil and his family to evacuate from their neighborhood in Gaza City to the adjacent neighborhood of Arimal, so that he and his neighbors, they did evacuate, but thankfully not to Arimal, because it was just too late. 2 hours later, that neighborhood was bombed. His neighborhood was bombed as well. It was targeted by F-16s, American-made F-16s. On October 10th, his home was bombed, and he wrote, It is the place of my memories with my late father. I'm extremely sad and feel deep pain inside my heart. Tears don't stop dropping off my eyes. I can feel my heart burning. I can feel my soul being suffocated by this. I want to scream and wake the world up. Now, if we survive, we will be homeless. But I'm sure that the hearts of my beloved friends will always be a shelter that can never be destroyed. On the next day, Khalil reported that Israeli forces were using phosphorus bombs. Tens of our neighbors are being killed now, and you just hear the screams of the wounded people under the wreckage. Still, I will never surrender. The following day, he was inside a house when it was destroyed by an aerial bombardment, killing neighbors and members of extended family. What is the world waiting for to move, he demanded. Until we are completely annihilated? A few days later, Khalil wrote to his friends to let them know of the death of more of his family members. This colonial system doesn't understand the language of equality, he said. The colonized and their partners and friends who advocate for human rights shall force this colonial system to stop by making a crack in the system through activism and solidarity. My family members who lost their lives to the Israeli bombing will always be the source of power to go on in this long way of struggle. Despite the Israeli directive to leave the north of Gaza, the bombings continued in the south, too. And on October 30th, Khalil was killed in an Israeli airstrike, along with his mother, 2 brothers, his wife Tasnim, and his 2 young daughters, Elaf and Rital. Khalil once told us that he was so grateful to have his young daughters because even if they were killed, they would carry on his legacy. Now Khalil is gone, and so are his daughters. Khalil means friend in Arabic, and Khalil believed in the radical potential of friendship more than anyone else we had ever met. The very fact that we were speaking, he reminded us, meant that borders could be overcome and colonialism could be deconstructed, that the systems meant to keep us apart were not inviolable. As he wrote in one of his final messages, it is important for me to say that this will never affect my enthusiasm for a better world for all people without discrimination. I don't want this to happen to any person. And I share and hold his memory here tonight to remind us, the justice seekers and freedom fighters, to struggle, to keep going, so that this won't happen again to anyone.
May Khalil's memory be a blessing, and may we hold our grief and devastation at his passing and the passing of so many others, alongside our resolve to stand for the just peace he spent his life fighting for. We are here today inspired by the Jewish ritual of Shiva, the ritual of mourning, typically carried out by loved ones of the deceased for 7 full days. This Shiva is not a passive act. It is an act of protest, an act of refusal. We are crying out for a ceasefire. And just as our tears are an external manifestation of our anguish and our fury, many of our Jewish mourning rituals similarly externalize the pain we carry within. One of those rituals is the kriyah, the rending of a garment, which is outlined in the Talmud and which has numerous references in our sacred texts. When Jacob saw Joseph's coat of many colors, drenched in what he thought was his son's blood, he tore his clothing. David tore his clothing when he heard of the death of King Saul. Job, upon hearing of the death of his children, rose, tore his coat, and threw himself on the ground. Traditionally, after one hears about the death of a parent, spouse, sibling, or child, one stands and rips their garment and wears this kriyah during the period of Shiva. Many of us here today are American Jews. Most of us are not relatives of the over 30,000 Palestinians who have been killed in Gaza, so many of whom have been violently stripped of the chance to mourn in their own faith traditions. Our tradition allows us to acknowledge this distance while still expressing our pain. We simply make the tear on the right side of our chest instead of directly over our heart. In enacting the kriyah for the 30,000 Palestinians killed, we affirm that our people are deeply linked, that Jewish safety and Palestinian safety are intertwined. Today, the practice of Kriya is to tear one's clothes, to reflect how our hearts and our bodies are torn. In a modern adaptation, many of us will pin a torn black ribbon onto our clothes, where the tear would be. We are passing out those ribbons now. If you do not have Palestinian or Israeli relatives who have been killed, you can put the ribbon on the right side of your chest. If you do have Palestinian or Israeli relatives killed, you can put the ribbon on the left side of your chest, over your heart. We're going to sing while we pass out the ribbons to remind each other of why we're here doing this today.
This is a song written by Serena Partridge for this moment. I'm going to teach it. It's pretty easy. Most of it is just I call and you response, and then we'll unite for the last line. So just repeat after me. Raising our voices higher and higher. No more war. Everyone together. We call for ceasefire now. Very good. Everyone. Raising our voices higher and higher. No more war. We call for ceasefire now. Raising our voices higher and higher. No more war. We call for ceasefire now. Raising our voices higher and higher. No more war. We call for ceasefire now. Raising our voices higher and higher. No more war. We call for ceasefire now. Raising our voices higher and higher. No more war. We call for ceasefire now.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to Elliot for sharing your story and Khalil's story. I would now like to invite up our next speaker, who opened with our beautiful ritual of the Shema, Simi, to share their story. Welcome, Simi.
Manora hamakom hazeh. How awesome is this place where we're standing right here. The Liberty Bell is right over here. So much history on this land and in this land. I was doing a little research on the Liberty Bell, and I learned that it is cast with words from Torah. So I'll recite them. What's written on the Liberty Bell is proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. This place is also awesome for me personally because I grew up going to Mikveh Israel, which is just down the street. It's the oldest Sephardic synagogue in the U.S., oldest continuously running synagogue in the U.S. My dad was the rabbi there for over 10 years. And so I spent a great deal of my childhood on this ground, communing with this land, hugging those trees. It is here that I received the inheritance of my paternal Sephardic and Moroccan heritage and the inheritance of this land. So I offer my gratitude first and foremost to Hashem, to my ancestors, and to the land. And it's with love and grief that I want to share and claim my family's October 7th story. About a month ago, I discovered that my relative, a distant cousin of mine, who I never met, was kidnapped by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival. His name was Eliyahu Elia Toledano, Zichrono Livracha. May his memory be for a blessing. He was 28 years old, a dual citizen of France and Israel, of Moroccan and Sephardic descent. He was married and had a dog. We share a family name. There were a number of reasons that led to why this news was revealed to me 4 months after October 7th. One of them being that, honestly, I was too afraid to look at the names of the hostages and those killed on October 7th. Pretty much all of my family lives in Israel. I was too scared to look. And I figured that if someone I knew was or related was killed or kidnapped, that someone would tell me. So by the time I had heard the news, Elia's body, along with 2 other hostages, were discovered dead by Israeli soldiers in Gaza. They were brought back to Israel, where they did an autopsy, and the report came back inconclusive, saying that they likely died by inhaling toxic gases or suffocation. So neither Hamas or Israel has taken responsibility for the death of my cousin and the other hostages who were discovered with him. One of the moms of these 3 hostages, her name is Ma'ayan Sherman, wrote a public Facebook post saying that she believes that her son Ron died from toxic gases emitted by Israeli bombs in the tunnels. She asserts that the Israeli military knew that hostages were in the place that they were bombing. To me, I hear her saying that our children are not safe as long as the bombs continue. Nobody's child in occupied Palestine is safe from US-funded Israeli bombs, guns, and tanks. And I will add that nobody's humanity in that land is honored so long as the occupation and Israeli apartheid continue in that land, and so long as the US government supports it. I spent a lot of time on the internet consuming anything I could about Elia, my cousin. An Instagram page was created, and it's called Remember Elia Toledano, where his friends and family posted updates, photos, and videos. And one video that I watched over and over again was a ritual that his friends and family did while his fate was still unknown. They all gathered in his apartment in Israel with a Torah scroll and a Moroccan rabbi leading them in prayer, song, and dance. It reminded me of Shabbat services at Mikveh Israel. One song they sang and danced to is a Hasidic song that is especially popular among the Israeli settler movement. The words are actually quite spiritual. They are Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Anachnu Ohavim Otcha. God, we love you. We love you, God. That's what they were singing, and that's what they were dancing. They were praying for Elia's safety and health by singing and dancing their love for the Blessed Holy One. Watching them made me feel inspired and uplifted. Now, a couple weeks ago, I looked up the lyric video to this song on YouTube. I started to play it, and then I scrolled down to read the comments, because I'm one of those people. And there were 2 comments. The first one was Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live. And the second one was Free Palestine. I then looked up at the video and I read, God, we love you. I smiled and I felt the Shekhinah. I felt the holy presence in that moment. It all made some kind of absurd sense. That's the kind of sense it makes. It was a bell ringing. Of course, God, Of course, love of God brought me to this expansive intersection of life and liberty. From the perspective of oneness, yes, Jewish and Palestinian life and liberation is affirmed. Each and every one of us has that divine spark. And so, through this lens of oneness, we are equal. This is an indomitable truth. The Palestinian people live. The Jewish people live. And I am so glad. From the perspective of oneness, the struggle for Palestinian liberation is its own struggle, and it is bound with ours. I refuse to allow Jewish life to mean Palestinian death. For Jewish freedom to mean Palestinian oppression. And for Jewish safety to be at the expense of Palestinian safety. The horror, injustice, and absurdity of occupation, apartheid, and genocide will not last, as the nature of empire is to rise and fall. So this current reality is not just unjust, it's unsustainable and disrespectful to the holy blessed one and the land who loves and provides for all of us. It is the love of loves. What endures is the land. What endures is the people and our memory. Our crying earth keeps spinning and the universe keeps expanding. And God is not just watching us, God is with us. God is us. So let us proclaim liberty unto the land and all its inhabitants, for it is inevitable. May the Palestinian people be free and safe in their liberated homeland, and may Jewish people be free and safe in our multitude of homelands. I'm grateful to Elia and my father's spirits and memories for guiding me here, to remind me to love myself, to love my people and all people, and to love the land where we all come from and will go back to. Thank you.
We're here to grieve. That's what we're here to do. And grief is not simple. It is not easy to fit into the fabric of your day-to-day life. That's something me and some folks who helped to organize this action were talking about on the way in. Most of our communities, at least the communities that I'm a part of, don't wear visible mourning anymore. And we were theorizing that part of the reason for that is the pace of grief and the pace of generating profit are very, very, very incompatible. Grief is slow. Grief is world-stopping, and grief takes time. But these unsustainable cycles that Simi talked about so beautifully are designed to not let us process. They're designed to keep us desperate, to keep us divided, and to keep us feeling powerless. But we are here to say that our grief is not powerless. We are not powerless. We are powerful, and we are taking our power back from systems that have divided us and pitted us against our neighbors. It can feel complicated in this moment to speak up as an American Jew about something that is happening in a land where I've never been. It can feel complicated to take action as someone wearing my ribbon on the right side of my chest, not my left. So there are so many complexities that come with taking action from this position, because we know and we believe that the people most affected by injustice, by oppression, and by violence have the most expertise to offer on how to end that violence, right? So what does that mean for us as American Jews? There have been times where I thought the best thing we could do was sing harmony and let other folks sing lead. And that is true, has been true, and will be true again. But in this moment, what I think our best offering is to loudly declare that American Jews stand with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Palestinians, that we will not allow their decimation and slaughter in the name of our safety. So we will continue, thank you. We will continue to weave our voices together, singing lead when it is time to sing lead, and singing harmony when it is time for us to sing harmony, and being silent and listening when it is time for us to be silent and listen. In 2 days, President Biden will speak on his version of what the state of this union is. But we know what the state of this union is. We know that Biden does not speak for Jews. He does not speak for everyday people. We know that this is the richest country in the world, and that hundreds of thousands of people living on this land lose their jobs, their homes, and their ability to have what they need more and more every year. We know that this is a country where there never seems to be enough money to fully fund our schools, to make healthcare and housing affordable, to pay thousands and thousands of workers who are not CEOs a living wage. But somehow, there are always billions of dollars available to fund the bombing of hospitals, of schools, of journalists' homes, and humanitarian aid stations thousands of miles away, somehow in the name of our safety. And so to that we do say shame, and we say no, and we say not in our name. Not in our name. We know what this country is, but we also have hope for what it could be. There are so many liberation movements gaining strength right now, so many inspiring visions for an end to these injustices and for alternatives that could replace them. And as a Jew, I don't want my people to be fooled into regression and conservatism because they believe the lie that the oppression of Palestinians is necessary for Jewish safety. We know that progressive liberation movements for the interconnected freedom and liberation of all people are the movements that truly embody our religious and cultural teaching as Jewish people. And so as I look at this torn piece of fabric on my chest, I am reminded of this tearing, this rift that Jewish support for the Israeli occupation and for apartheid has brought to American Jewish communities. As long as we teach our children that other people need to suffer so that we can be safe, we will be severed from our neighbors who have lived on the land that is now called Israel-Palestine, where we all once coexisted for centuries, and we will remain severed from those we should be allying ourselves with in the fight for justice. We know it will not be easy to repair that rift, that tearing, and that severing. It is not easy after you have been taught for generations to be afraid and to narrow your heart, to try and widen it, and question narratives of division and supremacy, to question narratives which benefit military superpowers and corporate interests, not people, but because those military superpowers and corporations need us to believe them, they have been feeding them to us for generations and telling us that those narratives are necessary for our survival, but we know that they are not. And we have to face the difficulty, the pain, and the fear of questioning those narratives, of talking to our community members who may still believe them. We have to face that fear, because that fear, the fear that we cannot be safe without domination, is not protecting Jewish people, it is endangering us. Only in solidarity can we achieve true safety, true peace, and true justice. So we're going to do a chant from another movement that is also our movement, because all movements for justice are connected. And it goes like this. The people united will never be defeated. 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 It's always hard to know when to end a chant. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, Jewish people of all backgrounds and walks of life who understand that apartheid, occupation, and genocide will only ever lead to more grief. So I would like to invite up our next speaker, Elijah, to share the story of one of those ancestors.
Hi. First of all, I have to say, I'm just going to be a footnote to what Allison just said. That was very powerful and beautiful. So I'm, this month, celebrate finally being on Medicare. So I am of that age. And being of that age, my first thought, as we've all seen people with gray hair holding the signs, is I can't believe we're still protesting this shit. I'm also a historian. I'm going to tell a bit of a family story and try to put it in some context. My mother was a refugee from Nazi Vienna. She left when she was 14 with her family. Some of the relatives didn't get out. And that story, obviously, I've lived with my whole life. But I want to say, when we talk about the Jewish tradition, every people on earth has good and bad in their traditions. If you read the Jewish scriptures, we have stories of our ancestors committing genocide back then too. You have to choose the parts you want to value and recognize that we are not the special people. I also want to say the history of oppression has often gone along with the history of oppression going the other way. The history of the Pilgrims is the history of a group who was persecuted and had to flee their country in order to then come here and be the shock troops of colonialism. That's not a new idea. Obviously, several people have spoken to the fact that Israel is presented as a place of safety for Jews. It truly has been a place of safety for many individual groups who had to leave more dangerous places to go there. In terms of the world as a whole, I would say it has made Jews unquestionably less safe in most of the world. I've traveled, I remember when Morocco still had a large Jewish population. I'm old enough for that. They had to flee because of Israel. The world is a complicated place, and because of that, I also need to say, a speaker said we cannot change the past. I think it is important to remember, yes, we can. History is constantly being rewritten in the present. We have to choose the histories we care about, and we have to deny the histories that we have been taught. The past we have grown up with is not the only past. I was recently at an organization meeting for Jewish Voice for Peace, where someone continued the narrative that Jews have always been endangered and have always been oppressed. It is not true. I have grown up as a Jew in the United States. I am a white person in the United States, one of the most privileged people on God's earth. We have my mother in Vienna was one of the most privileged people on God's earth. She was an Austrian. She was a European. The Nazis turned her into a Jew. She did not think of herself that way until the Nazis marched in. She could have, and here I will note, Theodor Herzl, before he became a Zionist, attempted to join a German nationalist organization. These histories are intertwined, and you have to choose the past. That gives you the power to do what is right. You are not living with whatever past people tell you you have. So I'm going to repeat, we are not special. We are human. One of my family's close friends, Iqbal Ahmad, some of you may know the name. He was Pakistani. Before he was Pakistani, he was Indian. He had to flee with his family during the partition. He ended up in university in France, met some students from Algeria, shortly became the only non-Algerian active in the Algerian independence fight. And people would keep asking him, why are you here? You're not Algerian. And he would say, this is not just about Algerians. This is all of our struggle. And you can always make that choice, not to say you are here for them, but to say you are here for us. So just finishing up, nationalism, tribalism is poison. We have to decide we are not the people in the airplanes, we are the people under the bombs. My mother brought me up with the stories of what happened to her, the stories of the Nazis. I know many, many of you were brought up with grandparents and whatever. I have heard many Jews say they were raised with the question, who will hide you? I did not hear that phrase until I was an adult. I was brought up hearing the same stories with the question, you are now a white person in America, will you hide people if they need it? I had relatives who died in Auschwitz. I had relatives who died in Kaunitz in Lithuania. I was raised by a mother who also talked about the horrors of the firebombing of Dresden, the horrors of Hiroshima. I was in South Africa when Mandela got released. I saw apartheid. And I'm just going to end up by saying, you can always choose. You can always say, we are the people who were under the bombs in Dresden. We are the people who were under the bombs in Hiroshima. We are not the people in the airplanes. Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that tension, the tension between hope and desolation, between community and the individual expression of our grief, and how we can turn that into collective power. And I'm going to invite up Simi to do that now.
Heart Valve by Erez Biton, an Algerian-born Israeli poet of Moroccan descent. Heart Valve. Why do you persist, heart valve, in growing narrower and narrower? After all, you will not filter out the sorrow of the world. It would be tempting for us to give in to despair, to feel powerless in the face of such blatant disregard for our shared humanity. But here we must take a lesson from the Palestinian people who fight through the unimaginable suffering to affirm their own humanity and the humanity of the people around them, to report the news, to provide medical care, to have birthday parties for their children, to sing and write and speak out, to refuse the silencing that would make their deaths convenient for the colonial powers who refuse to see them as human beings with rights under international law. This is a moment that demands we be relentless, that we refuse business as usual, and that we make our grief deafening as we throw our bodies and our souls into the struggle for a just future for everyone. These ribbons, these pieces of torn fabric that we see on our chests over our hearts, when we look down, They are small, and it's easy as an individual to feel overwhelmed by how small we are when we confront these violent systems, these machines. But this is why we must act together, why we must mourn together, why we must struggle together. In a moment, we're going to participate in a collective kriya, a collective tearing. This is a modified ritual for this group of people in this moment today. We are going to unfurl a piece of large fabric. And we are going to tear it together. Throughout this ritual, there will be a drum beating slowly. This drum beat is meant to represent the Jewish burial custom of the community of mourners taking turns shoveling dirt into the grave. The sound of the first shovelfuls of dirt hitting the coffin sends a resonance through the earth and shocks the bones of the living, often triggering and permitting grief and sorrow to be expressed through the body. As we begin unfolding the fabric, everyone is invited to gather around and to hold it. And those who cannot reach, you can put your hands on the shoulders of the people touching or holding it. And when the unfurling is complete, I will guide us through the next step, the tearing of the fabric. This action that we are taking together has so many meanings. It is an action of extreme sorrow and loss. It is a show of the power of our collective grief, those scraps all coming together into one much larger whole. It ritualizes the tearing of our hearts. It also symbolizes us tearing up President Biden's blank check for genocide in Gaza. It represents the tearing down of the apartheid wall in Israel-Palestine and all the walls that divide us for the sake of empire. We tear this cloth to make a holy separation between our lives before October 7th and our lives after October 7th. And just as sitting Shiva is an act of disruption and refusal, this imagined kriya is a refusal. We refuse to be numb to the loss of life. We refuse to let business go on as usual. And while we are devastated by grief, we refuse to give in to despair. As Jews, we also refuse to allow the Israeli government and war machine to dictate when and how we grieve. And we refuse to allow the U.S. government to use our grief and trauma as an imperialist tool. Our trauma and safety will not be weaponized. No! In a moment, we will collectively tear the fabric in front of us. Before we tear, we will, in one collective voice, recite the 3 Hebrew words mourners say during Kri'ah. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Blessed is the judge of truth. So repeat after me. Baruch.
Baruch.
Dayan.
Dayan.
Ha'emet.
Ha'emet.
Blessed is the judge of truth. You may tear the cloth. This is a poem written by Palestinian poet and activist Rifat Al-Arir. May his memory be for a blessing. He was killed by Israel in a bombardment of his home this past December. Let his words beckon you into the necessity of grief and uplift you to even a fraction of this bravery and unshakable commitment. If I must die, you must live to tell my story. to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad, who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite, you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Please lower the fabric to the earth. As we lay this fabric down on the earth, we remember that this one earth both holds our grief and weeps with us in pain. During Shiva, it is customary for the bereaved family to eat round foods like hard-boiled eggs to symbolize the cycle of life and contextualize death as a part of life. In these last weeks of winter before spring, we can imagine our mourning as part of this cycle too. We can imagine this torn cloth decomposing in the earth to create fertile ground for seeds of peace, justice, love, and healing to grow and thrive. We will close our collective Kriya ritual with 3 Hebrew words, which are a blessing of consolation traditionally said to the family in mourning. I've adapted it to be in the first person plural. The words are Hamakom Yenachem Otanu. May the place, aka the Divine Holy One, bring us comfort. So repeat after me. Hamakom Yenachem Otanu. May the light of the eternal flame heal our hearts and guide our hands in our devotion to collective liberation. Amen.
Thank you so much for sitting in the pain that we are feeling, but that we know is a fraction of a fragment of the pain that Palestinians in Rafah, in Gaza, are feeling right now. So we are going to continue our mourning rituals by saying Kaddish, which is the mourner's prayer. And it is my honor to invite up Spike from Rabbis for Ceasefire to support us in this next step of our collective grief.
This week's Shabbat is known as Shabbat Shkalim. It is one of 4 special Shabbatot that leads up to Pesach, our holiday of liberation. For Shabbat Shkalim in the Torah this week, we learn that we count the living, the number of people in our community, not by counting their number, but by counting their contribution to making a home for the sacred, a home for the divine. But this Torah does not teach us how to count the dead. As we gather for Shiva and for the mourners Kaddish, for those murdered in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the ongoing Nakba in Palestine, we know that more than 30,000 people have been counted as dead since October 7th, and that so many more remain uncounted. Loved ones who lie buried under rubble, or who have died due to famine, malnutrition, dehydration, and the multitude of other ways that this genocidal state violence creates uncountable death. The numbers we have today merely gesture in the direction of our loss. We cannot adequately count the dead by their numbers either. In Judaism, however, we do have a way of acknowledging their contribution to making a home for the divine. The prayer that we say to honor loved ones who have passed, the Mourner's Kaddish, is a prayer that is fundamentally about praising the divine. Our tradition teaches that each person's life adds beauty to existence, illuminates the sacred, and blesses the divine through their very being. And that in their death, the source of this beauty, this illumination, this blessing, is taken from us. And the brightness of God's greatness as a whole is diminished in that. And so we recite the Mourner's Kaddish in order to restore God's greatness. It is a holy affirmation of the sacredness that each person's life brought to existence writ large, and the sacredness of our grief and devastation at their loss. As we recite Mourner's Kaddish today, we stand at the gates of death. We hold on one side the hands of the living, especially those most impacted and most aggrieved, those surviving right now in Gaza. And we pray that our presence here today can give comfort and lend strength in these wild lands of grief and genocide. And on our other side, with our other hand, we hold hands with those who have passed, holding up with them their torch, their bright flame of life and blessing to the Holy Blessed One that those who have died brought to this world. Please join me, if you know it, in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemerabah, bi'alma divara chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchoma v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei d'kudsha b'richu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran be'ama v'imru. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, וחיים עלינו ועל כל פלסטין ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי פלסטין ותבל ואמרו.
It is so hard to move from grief into action. It is so hard to resist numbness, to feel the full scope of pain and horror and brutality of this moment, and to continue in our fight for justice, in our fight for a ceasefire as a first step to a just future for all people. The task that we are asking each other to do here today may feel impossible. But this is another moment where I take a lesson from many Palestinians whose writing I have gotten to read, who have been experiencing a spectrum of this horror for decades and have refused to give up, who have continued to fight for life and to choose life. Here, I am grounded in the memory of my own ancestors who came from countries that did not love them to a country that did not love them and that does not love them, and have continued to fight for life and for justice anyway. Today is the birthday of my grandmother, my great-grandmother. She was born, she would have been 126 years old today. When she passed, she was 103. And I carry her memory, I carry all of our memories, the memories of all of the loved ones that we have lost, everyone who has brought us to this moment where we are all here today, fighting for justice, doing the impossible task of turning our brief into action. And something that really helps me do that is music. We're gonna sing Lo Yisagoy, as we already have, and we're gonna remember, as we do that we sit Shiva for 7 days, but the Torah also teaches us that it took 7 days to make the world. So as we grieve for 7 days and beyond, we are also in the process of making a new world. We are not powerless. It is not hopeless. We must feel the weight of our grief, but we cannot let it freeze us in our tracks. So we're going to start with a more mournful iteration of Lo Yisagoy that some of you may be familiar with, and if you're not, you'll pick it up. And we're going to speed up as we go, as we bring this energy from an energy of deep grief into an energy of sustained and motivated action.
Lo Yisagoy, El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od HaMilchama, Lo Yisagoy, El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmedu Od Milchama, Lo יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. One more time. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גואל גוי חרב, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה.
Thank you to our wonderful song leader, and thank you all so much for being here and for staying here in the cold, in the wet. Thank you. When Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel returned from the 1965 Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., someone asked him, "Did you find time to pray?" He famously answered, "I prayed with my feet." We are all gathered here today, grieving the worlds that have been destroyed, but we are praying with our feet as well. We are refusing despair. We are refusing isolationism, and we are standing in our collective power, building a better world together and making a new one. I prayed with my feet, and literally, in a very unusual way this past Sunday. I started my day in a way that I have never started any other Sunday in my life. I got up in the morning and I went to church. I spent the morning at Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church in North Philadelphia, where their senior pastor, Reverend Dr. Alan E. Waller, publicly joined the over 100 clergy who have signed the Prayers for Peace Alliance's ceasefire petition. That was a beautiful round of applause. Let's give Prayers for Peace one more round of applause. They are doing such amazing work. I won't lie, being Jewish, and more particularly perhaps being trans, I was nervous about going to church. But we were welcomed in with such warmth and with so many powerful words. The powerful words of Sam Kotab, a Palestinian Christian man who is a member of the Alliance, who spoke before the congregation, and the words of Reverend Dr. Waller himself. I was standing there in the largest church in Philadelphia, listening to Reverend Dr. Waller speak about the need for peace in the land where Jesus, who he refers to as his Savior, and who I refer to as a nice Jewish boy, was born. And I thought to myself, there is so much room on the right side of history. There is so much room on the side of justice. It brings you into community with people that you expect to be divided from and to be pitted against. We might disagree. I'm sure that everybody here in this circle would disagree with someone else in this circle on something very strongly, maybe even bitterly. And we might argue, but we cannot let that stop us from working together to build a better world. Reverend Dr. Waller talked about the power of faith as a tool for peace and said that he hoped that the ceasefire petition, which he publicly signed in front of his whole congregation of hundreds of people, would soften the heart of our leaders. I don't know what it will take to wake up President Biden and his administration and shameful behavior of congressmen here in Philadelphia, like Senators Fetterman and Casey, to wake up to their own humanity and to the moral and political necessity of calling for a ceasefire. But I do know what they want. President Biden and other members of the Democratic establishment want us to ignore our moral compass and be quiet about what is happening in Gaza. They hope we get tired and lose momentum. They hope we'll be so afraid of the rise of fascism in this country that we won't call it out when we see fascism on the rise in Israel. And I know that all of you here today, just like me, are tired. We are grieving and we are angry. But are we going to get too tired to show up? No! And are we going to lose momentum? No! And are we too afraid to speak up for what we know is right? No! No. Sophie, Kay, would you be willing to come up to the mic and tell these folks before we sing what events they should be staying tuned for? Amazing.
Woo! Yeah, Sophie!
All right, so we have some upcoming events in March. Friday, March 8th. Friday at Fetterman's American Friends Committee, they're holding a teach-in, peace walk, and their weekly vigil with Palestinian Americans and Jewish American speakers, some of which are, if not now, members at the Arch Street Friends Meeting House, 8:30 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. Saturday, March 9th, the Philadelphia Palestine Coalition has a rally at Rittenhouse Square, all out for Martyrs Day at 2 p.m. Saturday, March 9th, the Prayers for Peace Alliance and the Oxford Circle Mennonite Church is holding a peace walk at 900 Howell Street at 7 p.m. And on Sunday, March 17th, the Prayers for Peace Alliance is holding an interfaith service of Christians, Muslims, and Jews for Palestine at the Plains Mennonite Church at 10:15 a.m.
You can get involved in our movement by texting "if not now" to, and we're going to call in response to this one. You can have your 8675309 moment. To 877 401 7257. That's 877 40. Yeah, hell yeah. 877 401 7257.
Elders with wisdom rise, ancestors surround us rise, in hope and prayer, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer. From the wreckage rise, with tears and with courage rise, fighting for life we rise, in hope, in prayer we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer we're right here, in hope, in prayer find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise,
humbly hearted rise, won't be divided, rise, with spirit to guide us,
Thank you all so much. Travel safely, be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other. Don't give up, keep fighting.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!